There are men who walk into a room and change the temperature of it, not because they try to, not because they announce themselves or demand attention, but because something about the way they carry themselves, the weight of a life lived at full volume, arrives before they do. Park Soo-ah was that kind of man. And on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, in an ordinary primary school corridor, with 7 men at his back and a neck tattoo that told stories most people would never dare ask about, he pushed open a classroom door without knocking. He always forgot to knock. He had never needed to. Setting the scene. Room 7 was quiet in the way classrooms get at 4 p.m. The children long gone. The noise of the day still hanging faintly in the air like chalk dust that hadn't quite settled yet. She was at her desk, yellow cardigan, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, a cup of tea going cold beside a stack of homework. She was marking with a red pen, slow and deliberate, like every correction mattered, like every child on those pages was worth the time. She didn't look up immediately. She finished the sentence she was reading first. That small detail, that tiny, unhurried act of finishing what she was doing before acknowledging the man who had just darkened her doorway, would stay with Soo-ah longer than he ever expected. When she did look up, she took him in completely. The height, the suit, expensive, dark, perfectly cut. The neck tattoo curling above the collar, like a signature he had never tried to hide. The 7 men visible through the glass panel of the door behind him, standing in quiet formation like soldiers waiting for a general to finish a small, inconvenient errand. She looked at all of it, and then she went back to her marking. Park Soo-ah was used to fear. He had learned to read it in people the way other men read weather. The slight shift in posture, the too careful stillness, the eyes that moved just a fraction too quickly toward the exits. He knew what fear looked like in a room, and he had become, over 15 years, very comfortable with producing it in people who were twice her size and had twice her reason for courage. She didn't give him any of it. She set her pen down, took her glasses off, folded them with the patience of a woman who had made peace with interruptions and still refused to be rushed by them. Park Soo-ah. Her voice was calm, clear, the kind of voice that had spent years projecting the back of a classroom without ever needing to raise itself. Your son bullied a classmate today, in my classroom, in front of everyone. He opened his mouth. He was not accustomed to being spoken to before he had decided to speak. He was not accustomed to sentences being aimed at him, rather than offered carefully, cautiously, the way people offer fragile things to men they are terrified of displeasing. My son doesn't get punished, he said. The words landed in the room, and he watched to see what she would do with them. She tilted her head, just slightly, the way a woman tilts her head when she has heard something that is technically a sentence but functionally makes no sense to her. Well, she said, I did punish him. He opened his mouth again. He will apologize tomorrow, she continued, as though he hadn't moved at all. A real apology, the kind that costs something, not the kind that is really just an explanation with the word sorry attached to the front of it. The moment he really looked at her, it was somewhere in the middle of that sentence that Soo-ah actually looked at her, not the polite, surface-level glance of a man assessing a situation, not the practiced scan of someone calculating exits and advantages. He looked at her the way he had not looked at anything in a very long time, without agenda, without strategy, without even knowing he was doing it at all. The afternoon light was coming through classroom windows at an angle that only exists for about 20 minutes in the late afternoon, before it shifts and disappears entirely. And it was catching her skin, deep brown and luminous, like it had been doing so her entire life without effort or awareness, like the light had simply always known where to find her. Her face was composed. There was no performance in it, no awareness of being watched, no subtle adjustment for his presence, no careful management of expression. She was simply completely, entirely herself. Sitting in a classroom at the end of a long Tuesday, marking homework with a red pen, unbothered by the most dangerous man in the city standing 6 feet away from her. He had spent 15 years in rooms full of people performing for him, performing loyalty, performing fearlessness, performing a respect that was really just fear wearing a more expensive coat. He had forgotten, somewhere in the accumulated weight of all those years, that some people didn't perform at all. She was one of those people. The kind of beautiful that didn't come from the arrangement of features, though the features were, he noted with some discomfort, remarkable. It came from something deeper, from how entirely she occupied herself, from the way she existed in her own life, without needing anyone's eyes on her to confirm that she was real. Park Soo-ah, who had never found anything unreasonable in his adult life, found that almost unreasonable. And if he doesn't apologize, he said. His voice was quieter than he intended. She looked up at him over her glasses. Then perhaps this isn't the right school for him. A small pause, warm as a closed door. I'm sure with your resources, Park Soo-ah sighed, you will find somewhere more accommodating. The precision of it stopped him completely. Warm delivery, devastating content. She had just suggested, politely, gently, without raising her voice even one fraction, that he take his son and his money and his 7 men standing in the corridor and find somewhere that would bend for him, because this classroom would not. This woman in the yellow cardigan with the cold cup of tea and the red marking pen would not bend, not for his name, not for his money, not for the 7 men visible through the glass behind him. He almost smiled. He caught himself. Although, came the quieter thought underneath, the one he noticed immediately and filed away for examination later. Like a man carefully pocketing something valuable, I have never once in my life failed to get what I wanted, and I own every street she has ever walked on in this city. He was not entirely sure, standing in that classroom doorway, whether that thought was a threat, or something else entirely. You know who I am, he said. She was already picking her red pen back up. Yes, she said. Kaya's father. That is who you are in this building. He turned and walked out. His guard, Shin Jin-ho, 9 years in his service, a man who had stood beside him through situations that would have broken most people completely, fell into step immediately. The 7 men folded around Soo-ah with practiced ease, moving down the corridor in silence. Shoes on linoleum, the hollow, echoing quiet of school after hours. Soo-ah said nothing for the full length of the corridor. Jin-ho, who could read his employer's silences the way a musician reads rests, not as absence but as a specific kind of presence, watched him carefully and said nothing either. They reached the doors. She was born to a Trinidadian father and a California mother. Jin-ho offered carefully, because something had to fill the silence eventually, and this seemed like the safest thing to place into it. Soo-ah was quiet for a moment. The afternoon air came through the doors, cool, ordinary, carrying the smell of the city that had no idea what had just happened in room 7. Find out everything, Soo-ah said. Soo-ah quietly, and he walked out, and the school doors swung shut behind him, and the corridor was empty again. Just a faint smell of chalk and cold tea and something that had shifted in the air without anyone being able to name it yet. Back in room 7, she picked up her red pen, looked at the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, then went back to her marking. And that is where it began. Not with flowers, not with candlelight, not with the careful choreography of 2 people deciding to find each other. It began with a man who walked into a room without knocking, expecting fear, and found a woman in a yellow cardigan who gave him something he hadn't felt in 15 years. The specific, disorienting, quietly devastating experience of being seen as ordinary. Park Soo-ah drove home that evening through streets he owned, past buildings that bore his name in ways that never appeared on the paperwork, through a city that moved carefully around him, and he thought about a red pen, about cold tea, about the particular angle of late afternoon light, through classroom windows, about a woman who had looked at everything he was, and gone back to her marking. He was, though he would not have used the word himself, in significant trouble, and he hadn't even learned her name yet. There is a particular kind of man who controls everything, not just the obvious things, the buildings, the money, the city blocks that carry his fingerprints in ways that never appear on any official document, but the smaller things too. The temperature of a room when he enters it, the pace of a conversation, the precise moment silence becomes useful, and the precise moment it becomes a weapon. Park Soo-ah controlled everything. He had built that control deliberately, carefully, over 15 years of decisions that lesser men would not have had the stomach to make. He had built it the way you build a wall, one deliberate brick at a time, No gaps, no softness, nothing that wind could get through. He was not, therefore, a man who left things on his desk. His desk was a study in intention. Dark wood, clean surface, a phone, a pen, a single document if something required his immediate attention, and nothing else. No photographs, no sentimentality, no evidence of an interior life that could be read by the wrong person at the wrong moment, which is why, when Kai walked into the study without knocking 3 days after classroom visit, what he found on the center of that desk stopped him completely. A photograph, her photograph, center of the desk, unguarded, in the precise spot where his father placed things that mattered, not to the side, not tucked beneath a folder, not managed or minimized in any way. Right there, where he could see it. Kai walked over slowly, looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled up the chair across from his father's seat, sat down in it with the deliberate composure of a 10-year-old who has just found the most important piece of information in the room, and waited. Park Soo-ah looked up from his phone. His son was sitting across from him with the expression of a small judge who has already reached a verdict and is simply waiting for the appropriate moment to deliver it. "Kaya," he said, "why are you in my study?" "Daddy," Kai said, without preamble, without softening, with a devastating directness that only 10-year-olds and certain retired military generals ever truly master. "Why is my teacher on your desk?" The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man who has been caught doing something he cannot explain without explaining everything else. "Background research," Soo-ah said. Kai repeated the word slowly. "Background research." He said the way you say a phrase in a foreign language you are not convinced has been translated correctly, testing the weight of it, turning it over, finding it insufficient on all sides. "On my teacher," he added. "I like to know who is educating you." "Right," Kai said. He looked at the photograph again with the careful, unhurried attention of a child who has decided this conversation is going to go exactly where he wanted to go and is simply managing the pace. "And Mr. Shin, my mathematics teacher. He is 63 years old. He wears reading glasses on a chain. He has a gap between his front teeth." Soo-ah said nothing. "Where's his background research?" "Kai. He educates me too, Daddy. Arguably more, since mathematics is every day and that is not the same." "I can see that," Kai said pleasantly. "I can see that it is very much not the same, because I don't see Mr. Shin on your desk." He tilted his head. "I only see her." The interrogation continues. Soo-ah put his phone down. This was, Kai understood, a significant gesture. His father's phone was an extension of his authority. He was never fully without it, never fully separated from the city that required his constant attention. When he put it down and gave you his eyes, it meant the conversation had become serious enough to warrant his full presence. Kai straightened slightly in his chair. "Kai, I'm asking a simple question," Soo-ah said. "You haven't asked a question yet," Kai pointed out. "You've only made statements." "Is she—" Soo-ah paused, and in that pause was a specific discomfort of a man choosing words of more care than usual. "A good teacher?" "That wasn't what you were going to ask." Kai said, "Silence. Is she pretty?" More silence. "Yes or no, Daddy?" Soo-ah said nothing. And in his silence, in the particular quality of it, the way it sat in the room differently from his other silences, heavier and warmer and less controlled, Kai found his answer interesting. Kai said. He leaned back in the chair slightly, with the satisfaction of a scientist whose experiment has just confirmed his hypothesis. Silence from a man who controls his entire city with a single look. He glanced at the photograph. "She's pretty, Daddy, and she doesn't take nonsense, which you already know." "Find something to do," Soo-ah said. "I'm doing something." "Kai." "She also looks," Kai continued, ignoring the warning in his father's voice with the practiced ease of a child who has correctly calculated exactly how much he can push, like she is not impressed easily. A pause. "She wasn't impressed the day you came to school, with all your scary men and your scary face." He shook his head slowly, with what appeared to be genuine wonder. "She just sat there marking homework. Daddy, in all my 10 years, I have never seen anyone do that." "Are you done?" Sun-jin said, not even slightly. Kai turned to look at his father directly, not at the desk, not at the photograph, at him, with the clear, undeflected gaze of a child who loves someone enough to see them honestly. Do you like her? She is your teacher. You keep saying that, Kai said, like it answers a question. And like I don't know, Daddy, because the photograph is on your desk, not in a file, not in a drawer, on your desk. He gestured at the otherwise completely empty surface, where you sit every morning with your coffee, looking at things that matter to you. Another pause. Kai's voice dropped slightly, losing performance of it, becoming something quieter and more real. There is nothing else on this desk. Just her. Sun-jin stared at his son. Kai stared back. I think you like her, Kai said simply, not triumphantly, not teasingly. Just simply, the way you say a true thing when you have finished deciding whether to say it and concluded that it needs to be said. I think you should go to bed. It is 4 p.m. Go anyway. Kai stood up from the chair. He straightened his school tie with a composure that was, frankly, impressive for someone his age and size, and looked at his father with the expression of a person who has saved the most important part of the conversation for last. Do you know she drives a black Porsche? Sun-jin looked up. I've seen in the car park. Kai said, black, clean, not new but maintained very well, which means she cares about things she owns. He moved toward the door unhurried. She also brings her own lunch, not because she can't afford the canteen. He waved that away. Obviously, she just doesn't trust other people's food, which honestly, fair enough. He stopped at the door. Also, she's single. How do you know that? I'm observant. Sun-jin looked at him carefully. She told her closest friend at school, Teacher Ji-hoon, that the last man she dated had the emotional depth of a spreadsheet. Kai looked at his father with an expression of pointed, careful neutrality. I thought you should know that. Going in. Going into what? I'm just saying. He turned back to the door. Stopped. Turned back one final time. And this was a line. Sun-jin would later think. The one that landed deepest and stayed longest, delivered by a 10-year-old in a loosened school tie at 4 p.m. She's not like the other ones, Daddy. Sun-jin looked at him. What other ones? The study was very quiet. Exactly. Park Sun-jin sat in it for a long time. Longer than he usually permitted himself to sit without purpose, without a phone call to take or a decision to make or something that required his attention and justified his stillness. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the door through which his son had just disappeared. He looked at the photograph again. She was at her desk in it. Caught in a moment she hadn't known was being captured, the way the most honest photographs always are, red pen in her hand. A slight furrow between her brows that meant she was thinking carefully about something. The afternoon light. That same afternoon light he had noticed on the day he walked into her classroom, catching the angles of her face with the unhurried generosity of something that had all the time in the world. She looked like a woman who had never once in her life needed anyone to tell her she was remarkable. He thought about the sentence she had used, the kind that cost something, applied to his son's apology, but landing somewhere else entirely when he turned it over now in the quiet of his study. He thought about the precision of her, the warm delivery, the devastating content, about the way she had gone back to her marking, without waiting to see what he would do, about the specific, disorienting experience of being dismissed by someone who clearly had no idea how profoundly unusual that was. He was in trouble. He knew it the way you know things that you have been trying not to know, suddenly completely, and too late to do anything useful with the knowledge. He reached for his phone, put it down again, reached for his pen, said beside the paper on his desk, without writing anything. Outside, the city moved through its evening. The streets he owned, the buildings that bore his invisible signature, the 10,000 small mechanisms of a life built entirely on control and intention, and the careful management of everything that could be managed. He looked at the photograph one more time. She was marking homework. She was not thinking about him at all. And Park Sun-jin, for first time in 15 years, found himself hoping, quietly, privately, in the complete silence of a room where no one could see it, that might eventually change. He did not write it that night. He thought about writing it. He sat at his desk with paper in front of him and a pen in his hand. the good pen, the one he used for documents that mattered. And he thought about what a man like him says to a woman like her. He did not know. He had spent 15 years in a world where words were instruments of precision, short, purposeful, designed to produce a specific outcome with minimum exposure. He had never written a letter. He had never explained himself to anyone. He had built an entire life on the understanding that explanation was a form of weakness, and weakness was a door left open in a wall that needed to remain solid. And yet, he picked up the pen, wrote 3 words, crossed them out, wrote a sentence, crossed that out too. Kai, passing the study door on his way to the kitchen for water at 11 p.m., saw the light still on, looked through the gap in the door, saw his father at the desk, jacket off for once, collar open, the pen moving and stopping and moving again with the specific rhythm of a man writing something that cost him something. He didn't say anything. He went and got his water. Came back. The light was still on. He stood in the corridor for a moment. This 10-year-old boy who had his father's eyes and his late mother's stubbornness, in particular, inherited understanding that the most important things are the ones that are hardest to say. He went to bed smiling. Rebecca's evening, the other side, across the city, in an apartment that made people do a quiet double-take the first time they saw it. Art on the walls that cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows that held the city like a painting. A kitchen that had never once seen a budget grocery run. Rebecca was on a call. Laptop open. Voice calm and clear, and carrying particular authority of a woman who knows exactly what she is doing and has never needed to perform it for anyone. She was closing a business deal. Her daughter and 10 years old. Homework spread across the kitchen counter. Pencil moving with the steady focus of a child doing something she considers beneath her full attention. Listened to the entire call without looking up. When Rebecca hung up and said, without lifting her eyes from her book, "You should have asked for 15%. Rebecca looked at her daughter, not 12, and continued. They were going to say yes to 15. I could hear it in his voice. You were supposed to be doing homework. I can multitask. Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it, and sat down at the counter across from her daughter with the expression of a woman who has had this particular type of conversation before and has never entirely won it. Mommy, and said, finally looking up, pencil set down with great deliberateness, the way and set things down when she was about to say something she had been planning for a while. I think this house is too big for just the 2 of us. And I need a daddy, and said, and you need a partner. That way you wouldn't have to complain about backaches from lifting things. It's a win-win, Mommy, mathematically speaking. You're 10, Rebecca said. 10, and agreed, but enlightened. Rebecca looked at her daughter, this small, precise, entirely too perceptive person she had somehow produced, and felt the specific mixture of exasperation and overwhelming love that reliably produced in her at least 4 times a day. She thought, briefly and involuntarily, about a Tuesday afternoon, about a man in a dark suit who had walked into her classroom without knocking and stood in her doorway, like someone had designed him specifically to be inconvenient, about the way he had looked at her, really looked, somewhere in the middle of the conversation, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find there. She picked up her cold cup of tea, told herself it meant nothing, told herself that twice more before and went to bed. There are things that arrive quietly that change everything. Not the dramatic arrivals, not the storms, not the confrontations, not the moments that announce themselves with noise and disruption, and the kind of energy that leaves a room rearranged. Those are easy to prepare for. Those you can see coming and brace against and survive with your walls intact. It is the quiet things that get through. A folded piece of paper on a desk in the early morning. Your name on the front in handwriting you have never seen before, but recognize immediately as belonging to someone who means what they write. No envelope, no formality, just paper and a name and the specific weight of something that cost someone something to put there. That is how it arrived. On a Monday morning, before the children came in, before the corridor filled with noise and movement and particular organized chaos of a school day beginning. It was simply there, on her desk, folded once, her name on the front. Rebecca, not Miss O, not Ms. Rebecca, just her name, written the way people write things they've been thinking about for longer than they would like to admit. She almost left it there. She picked it up. She sat with it for a long time. The morning was still quiet around her. Somewhere down the corridor, she could hear the distant sounds of school beginning to wake. A door, footsteps, the muffled voice of another teacher greeting the first arrival of the day. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Monday. The sounds of her life, assembled carefully, chosen deliberately, protected with the specific vigilance of a woman who had learned, not easily, not without cost, exactly what she wanted her days to feel like. She read the letter a third time. I am not a man who writes letters. She believed that. She believed that the way you believe things that arrive with a particular texture truth, not polished, not performed, not arranged for effect, just honest. The way the letter was honest, imperfect in places, direct in others, carrying in every sentence the specific weight of a man writing something he did not know how to write because he had never needed it before. I find you remarkable. She took her glasses off, set them on the desk. She thought about his face in her classroom doorway. The way he had looked at her, really looked, somewhere in the middle of the sentence about apologies and what they should cost. Like he had found something he wasn't looking for and wasn't sure yet what to do with it. She had noticed it. She had filed it away and told herself it meant nothing, and had thought about it exactly 4 times since Tuesday, without meaning to. You cared only about your classroom and the child in it. She looked at the letter for a long moment. Then she picked up her red pen. Rebecca's reply. She wrote on the back of his letter, not on fresh paper, on the back of his own words, which felt, she decided, like the right kind of honesty, like she was returning something to him whole rather than keeping it and offering something separate in exchange. Her handwriting was different from his. Smaller, more precise. The handwriting of a woman who had spent years writing on whiteboards and marking books and leaving notes that needed to be legible from the back of classroom. She wrote, Son Jean, this letter is one of the most honest things anyone has said to me in years. I want you to know I mean that completely and without qualification. But honesty requires honesty in return. So here's mine. It is not about Kai. He is a good boy, sharper than he lets most people see, which I suspect he gets from you. It is not about the school or the rules or the professional distance that people tell you is the reason. Those are real, but they are not the real reason. The real reason is this. It is about what you do, the world you move through, the weight of it, what it requires of the people around you, what it costs them, what they have to become to survive inside it. I have worked very hard to build something quiet and clean and entirely my own. A classroom, a home, a life that my daughter can grow up inside without looking over her shoulder, without learning, too early, that the world is something to be afraid of. I have built that life deliberately and protected it carefully, and I am proud of it. I cannot bring what you carry into that. You ask me to ignore what I know about your life. I can't. I'm too smart for that, and I genuinely think that somewhere underneath the letter, you know it too. And I think you respect me enough not to ask me to pretend otherwise. I hope you hear this in the spirit it is intended, which is complete respect for a man who was, for one page, entirely himself. Rebecca. She folded it neatly, left it on the desk, sat with the quiet of the room for a moment. Then the bell rang, and the children came in, and Monday began. He had made the reservation before she replied. He sat at the table with the river view. The chef trained 11 years in Paris. The lighting perfect. The kind of restaurant that understood that the space around a meal matters as much as the meal itself. The chair across from him was empty. He had known it would be empty before he arrived. He had read her reply in the car on Monday. He had known, by the time he folded the letter and placed it against his chest, that she would not come. He came anyway. Jin-ho ate at the bar, said nothing, watched his employer sit across from an empty chair for the entirety of a 3-course meal in the best restaurant in the city, with the particular composure of a man who had decided that if he was going to do something, he was going to do it completely. Sun Jin ate slowly, looked at the river, thought about a red pen and cold tea and the handwriting on the back of his own letter. Smaller than his, more precise, every word chosen with the care of someone who meant every word. Complete respect for a man who was, for one page, entirely himself. He sat with that. He finished his meal. He went home to the city that was his. The streets, the buildings, the 10,000 invisible mechanisms of a life built on control. And he thought about what it might feel like to be seen as ordinary by someone who meant it. He thought it might feel like something worth waiting for. Closing narration, Chapter 3. And so they passed that week on opposite sides of a city that held them both without knowing it. A man learning, slowly and against his nature, that some things cannot be acquired or arranged or managed into existence. That there is a category of thing in the world that requires only patience and honesty and the willingness to keep showing up without guarantee of outcome. A woman learning, or perhaps remembering, which is sometimes harder, that the right decision and the easy decision are not always the same decision. That the life you build to protect yourself can sometimes, if you are not careful, protect you from the very things you built it to eventually be large enough to hold. 2 children, across a lunch table, about to take matters into their own hands. A bar of chocolate, a plan set for Friday, and 2 parents who had no idea what was coming. There is a specific kind of wisdom that adults spend decades trying to find. It does not live in boardrooms or in the careful language of people who have learned to protect themselves with words. It does not live in the strategies of powerful men or in the quiet, fortress-like logic of women who have been hurt before and decided, reasonably and intelligently, never to be hurt in the same way again. It lives, sometimes, in a lunch table, in 2 children sitting across from each other with a bar of chocolate between them and the absolute, undeflected clarity of people who have not yet learned to complicate simple things. Kai Park looked at an O across that table and saw exactly what she was: sharp, protective of her mother, entirely unwilling to accept anything less than what her mother deserved, and just bored enough with watching 2 adults get in their own way to do something about it. And O looked at Kai Park and saw a boy who loved his father the way children love parents who are trying, imperfectly, awkwardly, with all the wrong instincts and 1 or 2 right ones, and who understood, with a particular emotional intelligence of a child raised by a perceptive woman, that his father was lonely in a way that a city full of loyal people and controlled rooms could not fix. They understood each other immediately. The chocolate was merely the formality. "I want your mommy to marry my daddy," Kai said. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without preamble, with the composure of someone who has decided that the clearest path between 2 points is the sentence itself, and put her book down. Looked at him. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "Say that again." "My daddy likes your mommy," Kai said. "He has her photograph on his desk at home, in the center, where he can see it. He wrote her a letter, a long one. I watched him writing it. He crossed things out at least 4 times, which in my experience means it was serious." And his eyes narrowed, the specific narrowing of a child doing very rapid calculations. "Your daddy," she said carefully. "Is he ugly?" Kai stopped chewing. "What?" "Ugly," and repeated clearly, with the tone of someone asking a perfectly reasonable question that she is mildly surprised needs repeating. "Is your daddy ugly? Because I am not letting my mommy marry an ugly man. She works very hard. She deserves to look at someone nice across the breakfast table for the rest of her life." She folded her arms. "So, is he ugly?" "My father," Kai said with considerable dignity, "is not ugly. That is exactly what someone with an ugly daddy would say. He is a very good-looking man," and did not look convinced. "How good-looking?" "Very." "On a scale, Kai?" "On a scale." Kai reached into his bag, pulled out a bar of chocolate, placed it on the table between them with the deliberateness of a man placing a legal document, looked at her, and looked at the chocolate. Looked at him. "What is that?" she said. "Chocolate." Kai said, "I can see it's chocolate." "It's yours," Kai said, "if you're in," and looked at the chocolate for a long moment, then back at him, the expression of a person locating the one loose thread in an otherwise tidy arrangement. "In for what exactly?" she said carefully. "Operation. Get our parents out of their own way." Kai said, "They like each other. They are both doing nothing about it except being difficult. We fix that." And picked up the chocolate. "Show me a picture," she said. "Of what?" "Your daddy." She gave him a look that suggested she found the question unnecessary. I told you, if he's ugly, the deal is off. I'd keep the chocolate, though. Kai sighed with the weariness of a man twice his age, pulled out his phone, found the photograph, slid it across the table, and picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, said nothing. Her face gave nothing away, which was, Kai noted, a skill she had clearly inherited from her mother. Well, she said finally. Well, Kai agreed. She set the phone down carefully. He's okay. He is exceptional. And we both know what you just did. He's okay. And repeated firmly. She slid the phone back, looked at Kai with fresh eyes, the eyes of someone who had just upgraded their assessment of a situation. New question. Does your daddy have money? Yes. How much money? A lot. Define a lot, Kai. Does he have money or a lot of money? There's a difference. Kai looked at her steadily. He owns buildings, he said, several in this city, and in other cities, and absorbed that. So, she said slowly, he's handsome. He has money. He seems, she glanced at the photograph one final time, put together generally. Yes, Kai said. Then why? And said, sitting forward with the expression of someone who has just found the only question that matters. Does he need my mommy? Handsome men with money don't usually have trouble finding. He doesn't want to find just anyone, Kai said quietly. The performance went out of his voice for just a moment, just a boy saying a true thing. He wants her specifically. I don't fully understand it. But he looks at that photograph like it's the only thing on the desk, like everything else in his life is just background, and was quiet. My mommy looks at her phone sometimes, she said after a moment. Her voice quieter too now, matching his register, without planning to. When she thinks I'm asleep, she just stares at it, like she's waiting for something to arrive that she hasn't decided yet whether she wants. They sat with that for a moment, two children who had, without meaning to, stumbled into the deepest part of the conversation. Then, and picked up the chocolate. I'm in, she said. I know, Kai said, but I have conditions. Of course you do, Kai said. My mommy cannot know. And said, she will shut it down before it begins. She shuts everything down. There will be a lecture, points and subpoints, and then it will be over. My daddy, too, Kai said. He thinks he's handling it himself. A pause. He is not handling it. No, and agreed. They are not handling it. They broke off pieces of chocolate simultaneously and chewed in the thoughtful silence of two people with shared problem and the mutual respect of having correctly identified each other as useful. They need to be in the same place, and said, somewhere that feels natural, not arranged. If it feels arranged, they'll both know and it will be over. Agreed, Kai said. No school events, too obvious. No dinner, and said, my mommy already said no to dinner. How do you know about the dinner? I heard her on the phone to her sister, and said, without missing a beat, I was supposed to be asleep. Supposed to be, Kai noted. I'm a light sleeper, and said firmly, the point is dinner is closed. It needs to be something that could happen to anyone, something ordinary. A coffee shop, Kai said, and pointed at him. Yes, I tell my daddy I want hot chocolate after school pickup. I've asked before, he'll believe it. You tell your mommy the same coffee shop, same time. They walk in. Kai continued, sitting forward. See each other. Can't leave without being rude. Have to sit together, and continued. And we disappeared at a table far enough that they have to talk to each other. But close enough that we can watch. Kai finished. They looked at each other across the lunch table. That's good, and said. I know, Kai said. What if it doesn't work? What if they just sit there saying nothing? Then we go to plan B. Kai said, what's plan B? I don't have plan B yet, Kai said, but I'll have it by then. And looked at him. That's not very reassuring. No, Kai agreed, but the chocolate is good. And looked down at the chocolate. Broke off another piece. Fine, she said. Coffee shop. Friday after pickup. Friday, Kai confirmed. They shook on it across the lunch table. Two small hands, one very large in serious agreement, and walked back to class on opposite sides of the corridor, like none of it had happened. The week moved the way weeks move when you are 10 years old, and waiting for Friday with the specific impatience of someone who has a plan and is being forced to wait for conditions to be right. Kai was patient. He had his father's capacity for stillness when stillness was required. He did his homework. He ate his lunch at his regular table. He said nothing to anyone, which was the hardest part. Not because he was tempted to tell someone, but because the keeping of it felt significant, and significant things have weight, and weight accumulates over a week. And was also patient. In the way that Anne was patient, which was to say she functioned at full capacity in every other area of her life, while the plan sat in a separate, sealed compartment that she checked on periodically and found satisfactory. On Thursday evening, Kai approached his father in the kitchen. "Daddy," he said, "can we stop for hot chocolate tomorrow after pickup? The coffee shop on Hangangaro, the one with the good pastries." Sunjin looked at his son. Kai looked back with the open, uncomplicated expression of a child making a simple request that has no other layer to it whatsoever. "Yes," Sunjin said. "Thank you, Daddy," Kai said, and went to do his homework. Across the city, in the warm kitchen of an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and set down her pencil, looked up at her mother and said, "Mommy, can we go to that coffee shop tomorrow after you pick me up? The one on Hangangaro, with the good pastries. I've been thinking about their hot chocolate all week." Rebecca looked up from her laptop and looked back with the open, uncomplicated expression of a child making a simple request. "The one near the river?" Rebecca said, "That one," and confirmed. "Sure, baby," Rebecca said, and went back to her laptop and picked up her pencil, smiled at her homework. The coffee shop on Hangangaro was the kind of place that understood its own purpose. Not too loud, not too quiet, warm wood and good light, and the smell of coffee that had been taken seriously. The kind of place where people stayed longer than they planned to because leaving required a reason, and the inside made reasons hard to find. Rebecca arrived first. She was in a camel coat, hair down, the easy confidence of a woman who had come somewhere simple for something simple. Hot chocolate with her daughter after a long week. She ordered at the counter, found a table by the window, helped and out of her jacket, sat down, and arranged herself in her chair with great composure, and looked out of the window with the expression of someone who is definitely not watching the door. Rebecca wrapped both hands around her cup. The door opened. She heard the way you hear things when you are not listening for them. Peripheral, unimportant, background. She did not look up. She was saying something to and about the weekend, about whether they should try the new gallery or save it, about what they wanted for dinner. Anne's eyes moved to the door. Her expression did not change. Not a flicker. She was her mother's daughter in this. Completely composed when composure was what the moment required. "Mommy," Anne said, "what about pasta tonight? The kind with the lemon sauce." "Sure," Rebecca said, still not looking up. "We have everything for her." "Miss Rebecca." The voice arrived before she had decided to look up, which meant she looked up without the preparation of deciding to, which meant her face had not yet arranged itself into anything managed or professional or carefully neutral. She just looked. Park Soo-ah stood at the entrance of the coffee shop in a dark coat, collar open, no guards visible anywhere, looking like a man who had not expected this and was not entirely sure what to do with it, which was, she would think about this later, in the quiet of her apartment with and asleep, the most disarming version of him she had seen yet. Not the man who commanded corridors. Not the man with 7 guards and a neck tattoo and a suit designed to announce what he was before he spoke. Just a tall man in a dark coat, standing in a coffee shop doorway, with his son beside him looking up at him with the expression of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. Kai looked at Anne, and looked at Kai, the briefest exchange, the most private celebration. Then they both looked away. It happened the way inevitable things happen. Not with drama, but with the quiet logic of things that were always going to be true eventually finding their moment. They could not leave without being rude. He had been raised, whatever else he was, by a mother who would haunt him from the afterlife for rudeness in a coffee shop. She was a teacher, which meant she modeled behavior she required of others, always, even when it was inconvenient. They sat together. The children disappeared. "We're going to sit over there. The window seat is better for us. You two stay here. will be right there. And somehow, in the way of children executing plans with more efficiency than most adults manage entire projects, they were gone. And it was just the two of them. A table, 2 cups. The sound of the coffee shop moving around them. Ordinary, warm, unaware. She looked at him. He looked at her. "I didn't arrange this," he said. She tilted her head slightly, looked across the coffee shop at their children, sitting at the window table with the studied innocence of 2 people who had definitely arranged this. "No," she said. "I don't think you did." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Not yet, but the territory adjacent to one. The place a smile lives before it decides whether to arrive. "There's something," he said. "They are," she said. "She's been planning things since she was 4. I thought I had a few more years before she'd turn it on me." He looked at his son across the coffee shop, Kai, who was eating a pastry with great composure and had the practiced expression of a child fully absorbed in his own business and absolutely not watching his father's table. "He told me to stop the extras," Sun-jin said. Rebecca looked at him. "Whatever I was sending." He said stop. "That it wasn't," he paused. "That it probably made you feel like I didn't actually see you." The quiet that followed was different from the quiet of their other encounters. Not the quiet of a classroom at 4 p.m., not the quiet of a letter being read, not the managed quiet of 2 people being careful with each other. This was the quieter of 2 people sitting in an ordinary place, having a conversation that felt, without either of them deciding it should, like the first honest one. "He's right," Rebecca said, not unkindly. "He's a perceptive child." "He is," Sun-jin said. "He gets that from his mother." He said it simply. No performance. Just a true thing, offered without armor. She looked at him. He looked back. "I read your letter 4 times, she said. Something shifted in his face. "I know what I said in my reply," she continued. "And I meant it. All of it. But—" She looked down at her cup for a moment, then back up at him with the directness he had come to understand was simply how she was. Not confrontational, not managing, just honest. "I also told myself I made the right decision 4 times in one evening, which is probably 3 times too many." He was very still. "I'm not saying yes," she said clearly. "I'm saying I'm here, in this coffee shop, on a Friday, and I'm not leaving." The territory adjacent to a smile became the smile itself. It arrived quietly, the way things arrive on Park Soo-jin's face, without announcement, without performance. Just real. "Then I'll stay, too," he said, at the window table, and broke off a piece of the second chocolate bar she had produced from her bag. She had come prepared, and slid half across to Kai, without looking at him. Kai took it. They sat in companionable silence, watching their parents across the coffee shop. 2 cups on the table. 2 people leaning in slightly. Not dramatically, not with the visible chemistry of a movie, but with the subtle, unmistakable body language of people who had decided that the other person is worth the leaning. "It's working," and said quietly. "I know," Kai said. "She's smiling," and said, the wonder in her voice carefully controlled but present. Not the sitting on top smile. The real one. "I haven't seen that one in a while." Kai watched his father, the set of his shoulders, usually carrying the compressed weight of a man who controlled everything and paid the physical price of that, was different, looser, like something had been set down. "He looks normal," Kai said softly. "Is that good?" And said, for him, Kai said, "It's everything." They sat with that. "Kai," and said after a moment, "Yeah, if this works, if they actually," she stopped, "would that make us like siblings?" Kai considered this with genuine seriousness. "I think it would make us family," he said, "which is different." "How?" "Siblings you're born into," Kai said. "Family you sometimes choose." And looked at him, then back at the window, at the city outside, the river in the distance, the ordinary Friday afternoon, moving around them with no idea what was happening inside this coffee shop. "I could live with that," she said. "Me too," Kai said. They finished the chocolate in comfortable silence. The walk after, they walked along the river after, all 4 of them, and holding her mother's hand. Kai walking on the other side of his father, the city doing what it does on Friday evenings in autumn, which is to say it was beautiful in a way that cities are beautiful when you are paying attention. They talked about small things. The children talked the most about school, about a project and was working on, about a book Kai had read that he thought and would like, about the pastries and which one was best. The conversation of children who had decided to like each other and are now simply getting on with it. Sun-jin and Rebecca walked beside each other. Not close. Not yet. The appropriate distance of two people at the beginning of something that does not have a name yet and is better for not having one. But occasionally, went and said something that made Rebecca laugh, a real laugh, the laugh Kai had been watching from across the coffee shop. Sun-jin would look at her, and Rebecca would feel it, and there was a moment on the bridge over the river with the city lights beginning to come on around them, where she looked back, and he was looking at her the way he looked at the photograph, like she was the only thing on the desk. She looked at the river, took a breath, let the moment be what it was without deciding what it meant, beside her, and squeezed her hand once. Rebecca looked down, and was looking straight ahead, face completely neutral, the portrait of a child minding her own business entirely. Rebecca pressed her daughter's hand back. She was not ready to say yes to everything. She was not ready to open the gates of the careful, clean, quiet life she had built and invite in everything that came with the man walking beside her, the weight of it, the complications of it, the world that moved around him like weather. She was too smart for that, and she had told him so, and she still meant it. But she was here, on a bridge over the Han River on a Friday evening in autumn, with her daughter's hand in hers and the city lighting up around her and a man walking beside her who had written her the most honest letter she had received in years and had come to a coffee shop alone, without his guards and his cars and his extras, just himself, in a dark coat, collar open, looking for the first time like someone who was genuinely uncertain how something was going to go. She could start there. She could start with here and now, and the small, ordinary things, coffee shops and Friday evenings, and children who saw more than anyone gave them credit for. She could start with that. They said goodbye at the end of the river walk. The children's elaborate, efficient farewell of two people who have established a working relationship and will see each other Monday anyway. And looked at Kai. Plan worked, she said. Plan worked. Kai confirmed. We're good, and said, we're very good. Kai said. They went their separate ways, and taking her mother's hand, walking toward the car park, the city wrapping around them, Kai falling into step beside his father, the evening cool and lit and moving. Sun-jin looked down at his son. Kaya. Yes, Daddy. A pause. The long pause of a man assembling something true. Thank you, Sun-jin said. Kai looked up at his father, at the man who commanded streets and owned buildings and had spent 15 years being the most controlled person in every room he entered, who had a photograph on his desk and had written a letter 4 times before he got it right, and had sat across from an empty chair in the best restaurant in the city. Because he came anyway. You just needed to get out of your own way, Daddy. Kai said simply. Sun-jin looked at the river, at the city, at the direction Rebecca and had walked until they were no longer visible. Yes, he said quietly. I did. They walked to the car together. The city moved around them, indifferent, enormous, carrying 10,000 stories in its lit-up Friday evening self. And somewhere in it, a woman was driving home in a black Porsche, one hand on the wheel, her daughter in the passenger seat telling her she should have asked for 15%, and she was laughing, the real laugh, the underneath one, and she was thinking about a bridge over the Han River, and a man who had looked at her like she was the only thing on the desk. She was not ready to say yes to everything, but she was, for the first time in a long time, genuinely curious about what everything might look like. That, for now, was enough. And so we leave them here, not at the ending, because this is not an ending. This is the beginning of something that does not have a name yet, which is exactly the right time to begin it. A man who spent 15 years controlling everything, learning, one coffee shop at a time, that the best things cannot be controlled, only shown up for, only waited for, only met with honesty and patience and the willingness to be, for the first time, genuinely uncertain. A woman learning that the quiet life and the full life are not always opposites, that the walls you build to protect yourself are only worth keeping if you are also, eventually, willing to put a door in them. 2 children who looked at 2 adults getting in their own way and decided, over a bar of chocolate, across a school lunch table, That love was too important to leave to the people who needed it most. And a city that held all of them on a Friday evening in autumn, doing what cities do best, moving, breathing, lighting itself up, utterly indifferent to the small and enormous thing that had just begun inside it. Park Soo-ah walked his car with his son. Rebecca drove home with her daughter. And somewhere between those two directions, something had shifted, quietly, irrevocably, the way the best things shift, and the city would never quite look the same to either of them again. The end.